Welcome to the Dr. and Mrs. Curry podcast, where the emphasis is on parenting related matters. My name is Dr. Joshua John Curry, and with me is my better half, Mrs. Cartresa Lynn Curry. Today's episode will concentrate on the academic achievement of children. We will focus on circumstances parents could find themselves engaged in that could hinder the academic accomplishments of their children. And of course, this will be from an all inclusive manner. This actually was the predominant subject of our previous episode. We felt as though there was a lot more to cover pertaining to this topic and thought that it would be appropriate to extend it into a second episode. Mrs. Curry and I were going to jump right into the first subtopic, which is substance abuse during pregnancy, something in which could definitely hinder academic achievement of children. This is something that I've spoke about this throughout various episodes of this podcast, that there will be times in which there could be certain things, whether it be a predominant topic or a subtopic, that could be a little bit discomforting. But the intentions were and the intentions are to present a platform in which we as parents can just come together and we can just communicate. We can just have that dialogue to share our perspectives, to share our experiences and things along those lines. And of course, the purpose is to be all inclusive and non-judgmental. We just want to just point out certain things. We don't have to agree with each other. I just want the purpose is to just let us all respect each other's opinions and perspectives and experiences. We don't have to take everything that's offered. We can just say, okay, perhaps that's a good idea, or perhaps that isn't something that I'm comfortable doing, and things along those lines. As far as substance abuse during pregnancy, I've been very fortunate throughout my professional career to work with a lot of great people, a lot of terrific families, and they've entrusted me not only to for them to disclose some very intimate details about their personal lives and what takes place within their family dynamics, but to entrust the research I've conducted, the trainings of which I've attended, and also from my personalized experiences, bringing them all into one and presenting those during individual, group, and family counseling sessions to ultimately help parents become the best versions of themselves that they can be. One thing in particular that's always a little bit problematical to discuss is substance abuse during pregnancy. And throughout this subtopic, as we're leaning upon that, I'm including smoking cigarettes and engaging in any form of tobacco use or tobacco abuse. We're going to say abuse during pregnancies, or any form of alcohol consumption. And of course, that means beer, wine, or distilled spirits. I'm going to dive into that. The intentions here, we're just going to focus on parenting related matters. I do not want to dive into tobacco use disorders from a clinical perspective. I do not want to dive into alcohol use disorders and matters along those lines. I would like to refrain from, well, my intentions are to refrain from any psychiatric episodes that could trigger substance abuse or chemical abuse related thoughts or feelings that could perhaps take place during pregnancy or just in life in general for someone perhaps struggling with active addiction. What I'm doing here is, at least along these lines for this episode and during the time that we're focusing on this subtopic, my purpose here is to just focus on someone engaging in experimental or recreational substance abuse while pregnant. There was a time in which I worked with a young lady, very terrific young lady. I always enjoyed our time together. I met her during an intensive outpatient group counseling session that I was facilitating. She was obligated to attend because of involvement that she had at the time with Child Protective Services. Once she graduated the program, she had requested to stay along with me to continue with individual counseling, which I appreciated. That showed me that there was something within what I was presenting from a clinical standpoint that she felt as though she could benefit from, as far as becoming the best version of a mother possible that she could be for herself and for her children. One thing about her, which I appreciate, which helped our individual counseling sessions once we got into that dynamic. She was always wholeheartedly honest with me, at least from my standpoint. And there was a time in which she became pregnant, and during this time, this was going to be her third child. if my memory serves me correctly, and the ages of the children, they're not relevant as far as where I'm going with this subtopic. She had she had children. Let's just say the two children that she already had, they were 6 years old and and younger, in addition to being pregnant. So what happened here is she came into an individual counseling session. She had shared with me what I would normally do. I may ask a client as I greet them in the lobby, and we're walking back to my office before we get seated, before we get settled, before I at least share with the client what my intentions are of what we're going to discuss during our time together. Items I pulled from their treatment planning, and perhaps from previous individual counseling sessions, matters in which that perhaps were left unresolved or were not wholeheartedly resolved. What happened here was she had shared with me that she was pregnant. I knew she was engaged during the time. I asked, was this something that are we all happy about this? She said yes, she's very happy. Her fiance was very happy, and he actually ended up calling into our individual counseling session. So we sort of turned that into a family counseling session. What took place here is she shared with me that, and during this time period, we had missed some time together. So it was approximately 6 weeks between our time together. So she shared with me that she just found out she was pregnant, but she was engaging in recreational opioid abuse, predominantly heroin. So she did have an opioid use disorder severe on maintenance therapy diagnosis. The reasoning why I shared that respective diagnosis and the specification of being on maintenance therapy, she was prescribed Suboxone. So what we're talking about here is I just mentioned that she shared with me that she was abusing heroin. She was prescribed Suboxone. She also had differing perspectives as far as the abuse of natural and synthetic cannabinoids, predominantly cannabis. So she was abusing heroin. She was prescribed Suboxone. She was abusing natural and synthetic cannabinoids, including cannabis and cannabicyclohexanol. She was also she had a tobacco use disorder severe diagnosis of smoking more than 2 packs of cigarettes per day. And she was also a recreational alcohol drinker. And these all persisted during her pregnancy. And she drank beer, wine, and distilled spirits. So I asked her one day during a follow-up individual counseling session. I said, when we're done here, what are your plans for the rest of today? She said she was off from work and she was employed. She was employed full time, and she was also attending vocational training to transition careers. So in addition to all that, I said so she had nothing to do as far as employment or vocational training the rest of that day. That actually aligned perfectly where I was going with my question. She said she was just returning home, taking care of some housekeeping, and just going to rest. And of course, she was persisting as far as her pregnancy. She didn't have any prenatal appointments that day. She didn't have any other obligations. She was just visiting with me, and after our time together, she was going home. So I asked her a rhetorical question. I said, "Your two children at home, and during this time, they were in school." I said, "When they come home from school, I want to ask you a question. Would you would you offer them?" And we're not talking about you're not going to get in trouble with the criminal justice system. We're not worried about child protective services. So hypothetically, I said, would you offer them heroin, Suboxone, cannabis, cannabicyclohexanol, one half of a pack of cigarettes per child, can of beer, a 12-ounce can of beer, a 5-ounce glass of wine, and a 1.5-ounce glass of distilled spirits? She laughed. And I guess she didn't know where I was going with that. She laughed and said, "Of course not. Why would I do that?" The point I was making was I said, and I pointed to her stomach. And she was with me for a very long time. She knew my approach. She knew that where I'm going, this is, of course, very non judgmental. I'm just trying to get us in an intellectually sound position to think from a cognitive standpoint. I want us to think about what we're doing. I want us to think about our actions. I want us to think about potential short term and long term effects that could manifest themselves from our current decisions. I pointed to her stomach and I said, well, you give those items, you give those chemicals to your unborn baby on a consistent basis. I said, am I right or am I wrong there? She paused for a second. She said, yes, I do. So that's when I returned to, I said, well, if it's good for your son or daughter, at this time we didn't have the gender yet. I said, if these are all good for your son and your daughter, why do the older two get excluded? Of course, that's a rhetorical question as well. What I was doing there was I was making her come to realization that the chemicals that she introduced to her body, her son or daughter, her unborn son or daughter, are getting them as well. So along those lines, she didn't have a response. So what I was diving into, I said, I'm not sure. I've never been I've never been a pregnant woman, obviously. I'm not sure that's something that a pregnant woman thinks about literally every second of the day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout their pregnancy. Perhaps if there's some sort of quantitative study, research studies out there, and there was some sort of research done, perhaps some women, depending on the results of the research, perhaps there's some sort of average out there. Maybe some women think about their uh, their unborn child more than others compared to how often or how much as far as the time of the day. But where I was going at there was I said we have to remind ourselves throughout the day that we are pregnant. We have to remind ourselves that we do have co-occurring substance use and mental health disorder diagnoses that we're working towards reducing features of. Where I'm going at there was not only, of course, me working with her for a very long time, I knew that she was involved with experimental recreational substance abuse. I knew that she also had a propensity to self medicate when overwhelmed psychiatrically. But what I wanted to dive into, of course, the chemicals that I just listed: heroin, Suboxone, cannabis, cannabicyclohexanol, cigarettes. And I'm including that as far as substance abuse. Again, not to turn this into a block of instruction on substance use disorders, but with her having a tobacco use disorder severe diagnosis, smoking cigarettes, of course, which is not the most healthy thing for an unborn child. Her consuming beer, wine, and distilled spirits. Along those lines, you would not give them to your two children, but in a sense, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps on purpose, through compartmentalization, you are giving these chemicals to your unborn child. What I dove into with her, something which I replicate with others, and there have been countless throughout my professional career, I dive into, are we worried about the short term and long term effects that this could have on our children? Surprisingly, the vast majority of mothers in which I make that inquiry to, they'll say to me, well, Dr. Curry, I have an 8-year old. I have an 11-year old. Dr. Curry, you may forget this, but I do have adult children. My adult children are doing very well. So I do have other children, and there are not any neurological effects. There are not any physical damages that's been done. But what I dive into there is, I say, as far as what we see on the outside, what we see on the surface, perhaps there isn't. Perhaps your child have been able to develop physically and socially in matters along those lines. They've developed and were successful academically, going back into the predominant subject of this episode. But what about long term? What about matters along those lines? What about as since where anytime a woman mentions their adult children or children who are perhaps 17 years old, 18 years old, 19 years old, perhaps there have been matters that manifested themselves in front of us that we potentially either either ignored or perhaps weren't wholeheartedly aware of. What about when they transition to the adult world? And now we're talking about the manifestation or amplification of personality disorders such as schizotypo, such as schizoid, such as borderline, such as antisocial, and matters along those lines, such as dependent. All of those are followed by personality disorder. Now we're talking about socialization. We're in a professional setting, and you're a child who's now, we'll say your child's now 28 years old, and there is a multi-organizational meeting. And what I'm doing here is I'm putting us in a position to think. Your child is in a multi-organizational meeting. What's taking place here is this is a meeting between various companies that are merging, that are coming together for a project that could be immensely advantageous as far as the community. Your child, who's now an adult, your child's intellectual property is now being broadcast in front of representatives from various companies. So what's happening here is these companies are looking at this project, perhaps on a screen, on a whiteboard somewhere, whatever's applicable. Your child's work is being dissected. It's being dissected not to attack the intellectual property or the productivity of the child. It's being dissected just to make certain, because this is going to be presented to policymakers. There's only going to be a one-time shot. So it must be as flawless as possible, with an understanding that perfection is perhaps something that's virtually impossible to obtain depending upon the circumstances. So the entities want this to be very flawless. So our child, whom perhaps were exposed to all of these chemicals during during your pregnancy, now as an adult, these personality disorders, which perhaps were being endorsed, features of these respective personality disorders were being endorsed during childhood, but we just attributed that to children just being children. Now we're an adult, they've amplified, they've gone undiagnosed. We perhaps have gone unmedicated. So now this adult is perhaps going through an episode. They've now felt as though they've been attacked. So now they're returning their perceived attack on their intellectual property or of their work onto those who are dissecting what's taking place. They're not even realizing, or they're not remaining abreast to the perspective of, we're just making certain because your work is spearheading this project. So it's not necessarily yours, it's just a representation of everyone else. So I'll dive into matters along those lines. And of course, that could be a little far-fetched, that could be a little bit to the extreme. So I'll bring things back into what about the realization that studies have ascertained that consuming chemicals during pregnancy could heighten the realization of your child presenting with or becoming diagnosed with an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with a combined presentation of hyperactivity / impulsiveness with an attentiveness and other psychiatric disorders. What about potentially predisposing your child to iatrogenic dependency upon various chemicals? So now your child perhaps have a 40, hypothetically, of course, a 40%, 60%, perhaps even higher of the percentage of developing some sort of substance use disorder diagnosis and potentially struggling with active addiction during a long period of time throughout their childhood, late childhood, early adulthood, into middle adulthood. It matters along those lines. I'll present all of these matters to women, to pregnant women, to pregnant mothers. And of course, we're not going to dive into substance use disorders and iatrogenic dependency. It matters along those lines. It's still very problematical for mothers to persist away from chemical abuse during their pregnancy, bringing things back into academic achievement. Mothers in which I've worked with, and I felt as though we've had that level of rapport with, I'll transition into the classroom. I'll say hypothetically, we have 30 children in the classroom. Now, as far as intellectual prowess, as far as grade point averages, numbers don't lie. And there's going to be a child listed at number 1, at number 2, at number 20, at number 29, at number 30. Someone's going to have to fill those respective slots. Where will your child rank if you've been engaged in substance abuse during your pregnancy? Are they going to be able to have that level of attentiveness, that level of ambition to excel from an academic standpoint? I've asked mothers flat out. I said, where does your child rank in his or her respective class? I've had mothers tell me, oh, he or she ranks at the very bottom. So I asked the mother, what's the reasoning behind that? And the mother will say along the lines that their child struggles academically. Of course, that's why we're at the bottom. But why? Even if we're in an advanced class, but in this case, I mean, there's still going to be some sort of ranking system. But in this case, we're talking about someone just struggling. They're not ranked at the bottom because it's an advanced class and everyone has a 92, 96 grade point average. This person, this respective child, is presenting with, unfortunately, they're presenting with failing grades. So what's different about your child and child number 6, child number 2, child number 1? what's taking place, or perhaps even what took place 10 years ago. Because yes, your child was born with 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 toes, 10 fingers, 1 heart. Everything's fine. They have everything they're supposed to have. They're meeting their infancy slash toddler related milestones as far as speech, as far as physical movement, as far as potty training, and things along those lines. But I want us to think beyond that. I want us to think about how what takes place during pregnancy could impact your child into their teenage years, into early adulthood, into middle adulthood, and matters along those lines. So what I wanted to present to you, all of those things that I've shared, as far as what I presented to pregnant mothers who were involved with substance abuse during pregnancy, what makes it so problematical. And of course, again, we're not talking about substance use disorders or mental health disorders and matters along those lines. Despite everything that's told to a mother about potential psychiatric diagnoses that could manifest themselves early or later in life, despite intellectual developmental complications that could present themselves, what makes it so challenging for a mother to say, okay, perhaps I should do something about this? Even with that example I gave with the woman I've worked with, when I said, would you give your 2 other children when they get home from school, would you give them heroin, Suboxone, cannabis, cannabis cyclohexanol, 1/2 of a pack of cigarettes, and various forms of alcohol? If you wouldn't give those chemicals to your 2 children, why do you give why do you give those chemicals to your unborn child on a virtually on a daily basis in some form of facet? From your standpoint, why does all this happen?
Well, every person is different, but sometimes some women don't realize exactly everything that happens with their body while they're pregnant. Um, and then there's instances where there's women that don't even realize they're pregnant until they're giving birth. So every person, like I said, every person is different. But when someone has a hard time and they struggle with something, as far as addiction of any form of anything, it's hard for them to let it go, even if they are pregnant. You intellectually, you want what's best for your kid. You're not sitting up there thinking about giving them this stuff, knowing that it could do them harm. You're just, in a way, you're compartmentalizing that it's happening. You're not acknowledging that it's happening. You're just thinking about what you need at that moment. If someone is in the midst of an active addiction, it's going to be hard for them to stop, no matter what instance they are. And if they're pregnant, if they're not pregnant, I do believe that being pregnant should give someone an extra boost in not doing it. But I think a lot of people just, they feel like they can't control it, or they just in some instances don't want to. But every person is different. I think a lot of people need to realize that as having a child and being pregnant with a child and introducing those things into their system, it gives them a higher probability and a higher chance of either one becoming addicted to them themselves and having additional issues in their life to where they may not be able to overcome them. So I think when people find out that they're pregnant, when women find out they're pregnant, I think it's a good idea for people to, whether it be a family friend or a family member, remind them of this, and don't show them the outcomes that it could happen if they continue down that path. Don't just tell them, hey, you need to stop doing that, because it's going to affect them in the long run, your child in the long run. Show them examples of what can happen and what does happen. Maybe that will scare them into stopping at the moment.
And those are matters that I feel as though, from a sociological standpoint, would have tremendous bearing on changing or transitioning that theoretical trajectory towards sustained academic achievement. Speaking of academic achievement, when you and I were living in Dallas, Texas, there was a dentist I went to. He was a specialist, and his office was one of the most unique offices in which I went to. He was very involved with sports, but that wasn't something that made his office unique. I went into his office for my initial consultation, followed by my very first procedure with him and his associates. He had pictures of his children, and he had all adult children. He had pictures of his children depicted throughout the office, throughout the entire building, actually. and they were all blown up into very large frames. And where I'm going at here is all of his children. They were he had them. They were in their university. They were all either enrolled in at the time, or they graduated from multiple prestigious universities from around the country. One of his children was actually at the time was playing for the Green Bay Packers. And he was very proud of. He didn't just talk about that particular child. He talked about each of his children. And going into his office, particularly once he learned that, which I realized, once he learned that you were a father, you were a husband, he spoke about family in depth. So what I learned was, if you schedule an appointment with him, prepare to possibly add, no exaggeration, possibly add an hour to your time, because he is going to brag about his family. He will repeat stories. Of course, I figured that he probably does this throughout each day with each client that I've mentioned fell within those lines as far as being a husband and father, and it was totally okay with me. But what I did there was I was using him as motivation, not be, and also he was a great practitioner, and he had a wonderful practice. But it was just like what he had depicted, and this was many years ago. So you and I were a little younger at the time. We just had our one child together. But what he had depicted, that was something that I wanted for myself. I wanted to be successful as a professional. And even though I did change careers from, or I did change professional dynamics as far as where I was during that particular time to where I am now, I wanted to be solid professionally. I wanted to have an idea of an identification of, this is who I am professionally. I will build upon this professionally as far as from a career progression standpoint. So I at least feel as though as of now, I did accomplish that individually. But with him having pictures of multiple children, if my memory serves me, he had about four, maybe five children, and just having pictures of each of his children throughout the office involved with college athletics. That was something that I wanted. I wanted to have, whether it was one, two, three children, four children, whatever it was, whatever you and I were blessed to have in the end. I wanted our children to have that lineage of success, and I felt as though that it started. That's going to start with you and I. I said that's why I always make that comment of, you and I. We're going to be that king and queen, and we're going to start that royal lineage, and that's the expectation that I have for myself as that father, as that husband, as that king. And I feel as though that it starts with you and I, that we will pass this down as far as to our children. They will pass that down to their children, and so on and so forth. And what I'm tying all that with academic achievement, of course, with that dentist I'm talking about, with each of his children being very successful academically and as well as athletically. And he was talking about his children not only being great athletically as far as their university engagements, but he was talking about his children being academic all Americans as well. And that's something that I want to have the expectation for each of our children, and like I mentioned, our grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And that connects me to when it comes to academic achievement and generational perpetuation. I always talk to you about an uncle of mine. Whenever birthdays came around, Christmases, and things along those lines, there was a time in which he was he would buy the presents, but he would make you earn them. And at the time, I didn't understand what he was doing. I didn't think he was being mean, but I just said, I'm going to trust his madness. As an 8-year old, there was a gift I would want, he would ask. I never went to any loved one and say, hey, I want this and that. I had an understanding of financial budgeting and things like that. But if someone offered, I would say, yes, I would like to have this. I would like to have that. What he would do is he would arrange, he would make it a big deal. He would arrange some sort of academic challenge for you. And it was pretty cut and dry. It was black and white. If you pass, you get the gift. He would always get the gift. He would make you see the gift. He wouldn't gift wrap it. He would make you see it. But he would also tape the receipt to it. And where I'm going here is, he would have this academic challenge. And it wasn't something I actually I was not successful most of the time. I did get a couple, but most of the time I knew I was going to fail. But what he was doing was he didn't make it impossible. He made it very challenging. He'd always talk about, I don't care about this video game. You will grow tired of this video game after a few months. I don't care about this toy or that toy. He said eventually you'll grow tired of it. But if I get you this set of encyclopedias, the knowledge you'll put in your head, as long as you don't do anything to lose that knowledge, such as chemical abuse and things along those lines. And he would talk in that language. He said, if you don't do anything to lose that knowledge will stay with you forever. So there was one year, there was a toy I wanted. It was the Super Soaker ZX 2000. So this is how bad I'm 38 years old now. So this was about 30 years ago. I wanted that Super Soaker ZX 2000. I did not write this down. I did not prepare for this. That just popped in my head. So that shows 30 years later, and I never got my hands on a ZX 2000. But at the time, those were very expensive water guns. I told him I wanted that ZX 2000. He purchased the ZX 2000, and I seen it. I said, that's mine. He gave me a chemistry examination. And these examinations were on a collegiate level. That's what made it very, very challenging. So being an 8-year-old in the third grade, attempting to tackle a college level chemistry examination that my uncle put together, it was a daunting task. I came close. I came very close, and I was almost in tears. And he didn't let that sway him. He said, "You failed, so this is going back to the store." And there was a time he would actually make you go with him to take it back, and that madness. So you're sitting there. I said, "I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of why should he cry. We're going to turn it in." So he said, "I want to have a gift for you for your birthday anyway." So he had dropped off a set of encyclopedias called the New Book of Knowledge. He said, "Read this." He said, "Read these all, cover to cover, each volume, A through Z." And I did. And what happened here was the very next time this came around, he asked that I read the books. I told him I read them twice. He said, "Okay, I'm going to put you to a test." He would design these examinations. He wouldn't give you any hint or where he was going, so you can go back and study. He would just put them back together. So since I told him I read it twice, I remember he gave me an astronomy examination. I came close to passing, but he can tell that I actually dove into it. But did he give me the gifts? No. He actually got me a computer. He purchased me a laptop computer. So this was in, of course, the 90s, of course. So we're talking about maybe perhaps even one of the very first models. He purchased me a computer. So as a young child, I'm not realizing the gift that he got me. But he was talking about, with him, he was big on education. He wanted our family to be highly educated. So that was something. And school was always something that I was very successful with. I was always happy to go to school. I was always involved with academics during our summer breaks and things along those lines. I am very proud to have gone through junior college, after high school, undergraduate school, graduate school, and postgraduate school. I'm very proud to persist through all of those. I'm very proud to say that I achieved a perfect grade point average of 4.0 at the highest level in postgraduate school. But that level of expectation I want to bring to our children, and they're doing very well academically as of now. And hopefully, this is something that could be persisted as we move forward generationally. And remaining along those lines of generational perpetuation, and we're talking about academic achievement, I've had associates, I've had classmates in which we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. They've had loved ones, they've had parents, guardians, custodians, and matters along those lines who perhaps were not successful academically. This could be going back multiple generations. They struggle. These are children that are in classrooms right now. There's a child right now, as we're recording this episode, who is going through some sort of issue in some classroom, in some school in the United States of America. They're struggling with something right now. They're looking around their classroom. Everyone else is engaged in the assignment, but this one student is saying to himself or herself, "I just don't have what it takes here." They have an understanding that when they return home, there isn't anyone that's going to sit with them. This could create a level of frustration, a level of disdain towards academics, and could lead to other directions in life. Talking about antisocial directions, directions of which could lead us to some sort of county, state, or federal correctional facility. from your experiences and what you've covered in school, as far as with what you're majoring in, focusing on that line of sociological perspectives and standpoints. From a generational standpoint, what could be done to shift matters from generational perpetuation as far as not prioritizing academic achievement to changing things starting today, saying, you know what, it's okay to wake up and say, from here on out, a perfect grade point average, that's the expectation. What can be done to move things into that direction?
You know, as far as like the generational aspect of it, it takes one person within the family to break that. You just have to decide that you're not going to have this cycle perpetuate. So if you decide as a parent that you don't want it to keep going with your child, it's great and it's wonderful. But if you also know that you're not capable of helping them with their homework assignments, why not reach out to the school and see if they have a tutoring program or if they have someone that he could stay after school with or that you could meet up with to help your child get to the level that they need. So that way they're not feeling frustrated and they're not feeling left out because you can't help them. It's okay to acknowledge the fact that you may not know something when it comes to your kids' homework. So that way you guys can learn it together. You know, and one of the great things about today's society is Google. And Google is wonderful and magnificent. You know, I have no problem admitting I've used it a couple times with some of the helping our daughter a few times with homework just because they've changed the way they teach certain things nowadays. But, you know, if you're not comfortable helping them because you feel like you're going to take them backwards, reach out and ask the school if they have tutors or there's tutoring programs and, you know, talk to his friends' parents and see how they're doing in school. Maybe he can sit with them and that will help him with his homework. It's all about finding a way to make it easier for them so that way they want to go and they want to do it. You have to make it enjoyable for them as well. So if they're frustrated because they can't do it or they just don't know how to do it yet, I won't say can't because a child can do anything they put their mind to. They just need a little bit of assistance sometimes. And if you're not able as their parent to give them that assistance, find them that assistance. It's okay to admit that you don't know. So if you're able to find someone to do that, why not sit with him too and show him that you're supporting him and that you want him to do better? That's the main thing as a parent. You have to show encouragement and you have to put forth the effort so that way they see that effort. So that way they will break that generational cycle if they have that encouragement too.
You know, speaking of Google, there was a time, this is probably the only situation I recall as far as with our children with helping with homework. Our daughter had, and I know she's not going to, if she comes to one of us with an issue with homework, she must have exhausted all means.
Yeah.
And because she takes her academics very seriously. She came to me with a worksheet, and she said the teacher did explain it, but she said we all just struggle with it. And I do want to, before I continue with that, I do want to say that one thing that I wanted to do as a father, I said, whenever I have a child, and then that follows up with multiple children, I want my children to have the best education. So I do feel very, very fortunate to say that our children have been in private schools and some of the best schools in the country throughout their lives. So bringing this back to our daughter, she was struggling with this one assignment. This was about 2 to 3 years ago. She presented it to me. I looked at the document. I said I had to look at it again and said, "Is this even in English?" It was in English after I verified that. So of course I said, "I have no idea what this is." Saying this to myself. So I said, "Where's your mother at?" She said, "She sleeps." I said, "I guess it's just you and I." And I said, "You don't know where to start?" She said, "No." And I'm like, "Wow, if you don't know where to start, this is very challenging." So I got onto Google. There was a mathematician. I was able to access his website, which directed me to his YouTube channel. And this level, and it took a doctoral level mathematician. It took me researching this mathematician's channel to translate what was taking place. And our daughter, I was able to help her out with her homework assignment that she couldn't even crack. So it took a mathematician, but I was very that took about an hour or so. But it took me aback, like wow, our children just being at the time she's in middle school, just starting out in middle school, she's bringing home homework that requires me to get on the internet and essentially seek the service of a mathematician on the other side of the country to help out with this particular document. And she brought the grade home. She did receive a perfect score, but all I did there was, of course, not doing it for her because I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to set the example, give that blueprint, and then she was able to figure out things. So it was just all about getting that first step off the ground. As I discussed that, that reminded me of a time in which I was working in a residential facility, working working with individuals who were adjudicated there because of involvement with the criminal justice system. They were referred to as students. So there were a couple of students. This was during the weekend. I was working the entire Saturday, early in the morning until late at night. One of the students had said to me that it's been a while. Would I mind purchasing the class some pizza? I never told them that I never paid for the pizza. I actually knew someone who was a manager at the local pizzeria. And he had shared with me, I didn't want to take advantage of it, but he had shared with me anytime I would like to order pizza, either for a classroom or for an entire floor, he told me to let him know that he would deliver it himself personally, which he always did. I only, over the span of approximately 18 months, I only did that about maybe 5, 6 times. And he would bring more than what I've requested, more soda than I requested, more snacks than I requested, and he would always deliver it himself, which I was very appreciative for. And he had did this, he felt as though that he had owed me because of professional work that I've done for him. And I made sure that he was cognizant of that he didn't owe me anything. I was just doing a job. But but it felt good by him always saying that the job I did was much higher, exponentially better compared to others that he's worked with. So that meant a lot to me. That ties into the preparation that I bring to work. I don't just go there unprepared. So that meant a lot to me. And that was his way of, he felt like he wanted to repay. I told him that he didn't have to. I did share with him that we had funds to pay for the pizza, but he wouldn't accept any payment. So I just accepted it for what it was. But I told the students that, of course, we can't just request pizza from a pizzeria. We have to earn it. So what I shared with them was our daughter, she had placed in the math Olympics that year. This was something that was a goal of hers. So this was the first time she placed on a state level in the mathematics Olympics. So I actually took one of the problems she was given. I gave it to the student, and keep in mind, she was in the 5th grade at this particular time when she placed in the mathematics Olympics. So I gave them, I felt as though this was a 5th grade problem because it was given to, even though these are advanced mathematics students, and it was the final round of the mathematics Olympics, I still looked at that as a 5th grade problem. I gave that problem to 3 of the students. It was 3 of the top students academically on that respective floor or in that classroom. I told them, I said, you guys solve this. I'm about to go take care of an obligation. I'll come back if the answer is correct. I'll order the pizza and it'll be here within the next hour or so. They had no idea where to start. Actually, it took me a while to come back. I came back about an hour and a half later. Unfortunately, there was an emergency I had to tend to as a clinical practitioner, but I didn't forget about them. When I came back, they had no idea where to start, and the document was still blank. I asked them, I was very confused. I said, what's going on here? They said, this is something that I made up. I said, no, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't just give you something that's not real. I said, no, this is an actual mathematical problem I'm asking you to solve if you all want this pizza. And it was a reminder for a few minutes, regardless of how prestigious I looked at them, regardless of how intellectually sound I thought they were, regardless of how great I viewed them as, it was a reminder of the lack of academic accomplishments that they've endured, reaching that point. And keep in mind, they were all, at least officially, they were all high school seniors. That reminded me that they've somehow advanced that far. And they were talking about going to college, and they were not even able to solve something like that. So what I did, I gave them something simple. They couldn't solve that. So I kept reducing it. I wanted them to solve something. I didn't want to order the pizza with them we're not earning it. So I gave them something simpler. They couldn't solve it. So I just kept reducing it. I kept reducing it. I kept watering it down. And it's okay. Now I'm actually hurting their self-esteem. So I just gave them something that I felt as though that they could solve, but something that wasn't insultive. They were able to pass it. They celebrated. We ordered the pizza. I got them all back together. The very next day, it's okay. I had to be honest with you. I said, we are behind the power curve intellectually. I said, some of you all have already been accepted to various colleges and universities around the state. I want to make certain that you're not going to be set up for failure or find yourself overwhelmed academically and end up dropping out of school. That's what we don't want. So what I did there was I volunteered. I said for 2 hours a day, I will have some tutoring sessions. I didn't expect many to show up. I said for under this, we're not going to do. There's not going to be any music. There's not going to be any internet. Any matters. This isn't going to be a party along those lines. So we're just going to focus on studying. There's not going to be any rewards afterwards. This is something serious. I want to make sure that you all are successful when you all hit this college campus here. And for some of them, they had their first classes that they were going to start within 90 to in some cases 60 days from that particular day. I said, for some of y'all, we have a lot of work to do and we don't have much time to do it. And surprisingly, it was a huge turnout. But where I'm getting at there was there are some cases throughout this country in which students are being pushed. And of course, I don't want anyone to be held back. I want them to have the most prestigious academic experience that they can have while they're in that setting. But people are being pushed. And what that can do is now we've been pushed through middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school. We've been pushed, but we're not prepared. Now we're on a college campus. Now we're with our contemporaries from other parts of the city, other parts of the state, other parts of the country, and in some cases, we have international contemporaries with us. So now we're in an environment, in a very fast-paced environment, and we realize that, wow, academically, I am at the bottom here. And I've met plenty of people who've gone away to a university, to a college, and within that first term, that first semester, they've already given up. They were not kicked out. They were not removed from the university. They've decided themselves to walk away. Now, remaining along the lines of academic achievement, to make certain that doesn't happen, I've shared with you on multiple occasions during my 11th grade year at the best high school on the planet, West Philadelphia High School. I've shared with you that the previous year's valedictorian, she had went away to a university, and she had told me that she actually did flunk out, and she did return to West Philadelphia, and I ran into her, and she had told me how fast paced it was. And she didn't go to an Ivy League university, but she still went to a very prestigious university. And I was always comfortable with myself academically, but knowing that, and this was someone who I respected and admired in many different ways, particularly academically. So knowing that she flunked out, and I knew that she didn't go away just from knowing her at the time for a significant period of my life. I knew that she didn't go away and just started acting inappropriately, perhaps didn't prioritize her academics. I knew that wasn't the issue with her. And she did confirm that. She said, she would call me Buster. She said, Buster, I studied. I did everything. I just couldn't do it. So that's why I just returned home and I'm going to figure out a different plan. So just so that doesn't happen to people moving forward, what would you recommend to a child or to parents or to a family starting now to change that perspective so we can not just move on to the next grade, but be prepared for the next level, for the next grade, and to be prepared when we go on to a college campus?
One of the things I do that I've done with our kids is even during the summertime, they have compilation notebook, like compilation school activity books, and they have them for their grade that they're either leaving or they're going into. With our daughter, I've always bought those, so like a grade level ahead. And like throughout the summer, she still has to sit down and do schoolwork for at least an hour before she can go do anything else. Like you still need to dedicate at least an hour's worth of time to learning so that your brain stays active and it keeps learning new material, and it maintains and keeps the material that you've already learned by doing that. So I think one of the things, and it teaches good study habits for why they're in current classes as well. So I think one of the best things that parents can do for their kids to get them ready for a mindset of college is by doing that. Get those composition notebooks that they have them for their grade. So she's going into the 9th grade. So get one for the 9th grade. And then she'd have to do at least an hour a day during the summertime. So they cover math, they cover science, they cover social studies, they cover all the school subjects. So that gives them a head start and a jump start on the upcoming school year, but it also teaches them to dedicate time to their studies. So one of the biggest things with college is that you have to dedicate time to do your studies, like so that way, and you need to learn and know how to study. So by doing those books with her and by doing those books with your students, I feel it teaches them that. So that will help prepare them for their future because now they're setting a set of goals and they're also setting a set of behaviors in place that is normal to them. So it's not going to be a shock to their system to sit down and do it because they've been doing it forever. So it's a normal behavior to sit there and do that.
With that standpoint, as far as dedicating that time, when I left high school, the best high school on the planet, again, West Philadelphia High School, when I left high school, I went into the United States Army, and there was talks about once initial entry training was done, there were talks about getting trainings converted over into college credits, which I was able to do. And pretty much I started off at Central Texas College, a junior college in Killeen, Texas. I started off there with essentially 1 year of school under my belt. It was recommended to me. I was working with a guidance counselor, and actually, that guidance counselor I worked with, what I had behind me as far as my academic achievements, I copied this from how he had his office set up. I admired that. Now, at the time, I just turned 19 years old after graduating high school and spending time with initial entry training with the United States Army. So I didn't have anything to my name besides those respective certificates and my high school diploma. But his wall, I said, I want my wall or my walls to look like his. That was something that I admired. And I did tell myself at the time I looked at his wall. He had an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a doctorate degree. So that was the first time sitting there in his office as he's taking care of documentation to get my coursework aligned up for Central Texas College. I said, I will get all 4 of those at some point, and I'm very proud to say that I was able to accomplish that goal. But he had recommended to me, he said, no matter what, he said, every day from here on out, he said, you should study, you should focus, you should allocate at least 1 hour a day. He said, that's nothing, but you can do so much with the accumulation of that 1 hour. He said, promise me right now, you will give yourself at least 1 hour a day towards studies. I said, yeah, I can do that. And when the first day I did it, I said, well, that wasn't a lot. It wasn't overwhelming, but I accomplished so much. And as I replicated that over the next 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42 days, I was able to accomplish so much, particularly taking courses that were 16 weeks at a time. I was able to accomplish so much without being overwhelmed, just like you mentioned, as far as your system being shocked. But one thing I wanted to, and I'm not going to take up too much time here. Let's just say we're talking about a younger child, maybe someone that's not at the college level as of now, but someone who perhaps they've had nothing but failing grades going back from elementary school. And I've met people, not many people, I've met people who told me that they've had to repeat the first grade, they had to repeat kindergarten because of academic failures. And that's something that perpetuated itself into 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, so on and so forth. And again, like we mentioned earlier in this episode, these are children who were, and of course, I do not want anyone held back. I want us all to have perfect grade point averages. I want us all to have high academic honors and matters along those lines. But we're talking about a child who've had nothing but failing grades. That's all they've been accustomed to. You and I both know, and sociologically, society knows that as far as the accumulation of those failing grades, this person, not saying that this person is not going to accomplish anything of significance in life, but their trajectory, their path is going to be a little bit more problematical. It's going to be a little more challenging for someone who've had nothing but failure. If they don't have a sufficient level of support, if it's just them, if they're coming from a family dynamic, and of course, we're being non-judgmental. If they're coming from a family dynamic in which there isn't that wise, mature, responsible adult that's going to grab that child and say, "We're going to study now. Here's what I want you to do because I want to break this chain." This child's on their own. They don't have that support. They don't have that role model because of teachers being so busy, not just with academics, but we know that there are certain times in which teachers may have to deal with behavioral challenges, so time's taken away. Like I shared with you, I've been in classrooms in which there were, looking back at as an adult now, there were children who perhaps had a lot of things going on at home. They perhaps had intellectual developmental challenges. They perhaps were that child whose mother was consuming mind altering chemicals during their pregnancy. So as a young child, I had no idea what's going on here. But now as an older, experienced, credentialed, educated practitioner, I have at least a hypothesis about what was taking place, connecting that with theorization. But where I'm going here is we have a child. They have nothing. They have no one that's going to inspire them. They have an accumulation of failed grades, of low grades, but just being pushed along because of no child left behind. Again, that's something that I support, but I do want children to not just move along. I want them to be successful, and I want them to be confident and embrace what's coming next academically. What could we offer that child on this particular platform to get them in a position to go from failing essentially to passing, but not just passing, excelling, because academic achievement could be a springboard as far as opening a variety of doors for us in life. What could we offer that child?
Unfortunately, that type of child's going to have to be a self-starter. They're going to have to want it for themselves. And for instance, if maybe it's the location that they're at, they just say forget it because it's too loud. There's no place for them to sit and study. There's no place for them to do that. I think it's important to remind kids that there are other places that they can go to where it's quieter, to where they can concentrate, to where they can study and they can learn new things while they're there as well. Like the public library, for instance, is a great place to go if where you live at is too loud and you can't concentrate on your homework. You don't need anything but to just walk in and sit at a table. And in a lot of instances, the librarian can help you. Like if you can go to the librarian and ask her a question, because a lot of people don't realize this, but that is an actual degree path. A lot of librarians have degrees. They have in that particular field in library studies. So that is an avenue that they can choose to go to, so that way they can get themselves started the right way. Like all it is a matter of having the drive. Do you want this? You need to ask yourself, do I want this? Yes, I want this. So let me find what I need in order to get this. Like I said, go to the library so you can sit in peace and quiet and you can read for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. You can study, you can ask questions that you may need help with. They are there for that. You have your school library as well, which again, the librarian there can help you if you need help. Sometimes if you wait after school and you talk to your teacher can help you and give you what you need in order to either get caught back up or help you understand what you were not understanding. So in this instance, for a child like that, they're going to have to be a self-starter and just decide if this is what they want.
When you make it mentioning of being that self-starter, that's that's something that could be synonymous with it be a cognitive behavioral characteristic. So there could be times in which, what if someone, and I'm going to swing this back to you, what if someone just doesn't have that intangible within them? They're just not that self-starter, but something as far as transitioning from racking up those failing grades to switching those out as far as passing grades. For someone who isn't a self-starter, what can we offer them on this platform?
I would say for someone in that instance, I would say talk to your teachers. Talk to those at your school that are the ones giving you your grades, because there's a disconnect somewhere for failing grades. Like either you didn't do an assignment or you missed something. So if you go and you speak with your teachers, they can give you what you're missing. And by doing that, they may also have time to go over it with you, especially like if you do it after school. I say for any student, it's important to speak to your teachers, but pick a time that's manageable for them, either during lunch or after school or first thing in the morning before the bells ring. Because if you try and do it during class, they're not going to have time to help you during class or talk to you about what you need during class, because they have all the other students as well in the lesson that they need to teach. So I would say for that student, talk to your teachers, talk to your school aides, so that way you can get the help and assistance you need, and they'll be able to help you and show you what's going on.
And when you're talking about finding that time to meet with teachers, I'm a huge advocate, and I've done this myself, of taking, of course, if this is something that applies to your school, taking classes before the school starts early in the day, taking evening classes, taking classes on weekends, and taking summer classes. I've done them all just to have a much quieter environment, just to have a more sufficient teacher to student ratio. Of course, if we're talking about early morning, late afternoon, weekend, or summer, it's a much more efficient student to teacher to student ratio. So then that teacher has more of an appropriate amount of time to help you with particular needs that can make certain that your academic achievement is something that comes to fruition. And with you mentioning about society may not knowing about how educated librarians are, I had an examination that I need to have proctored at a library. And at the time, I believe I was 36, 37 years old. I had no idea that each librarian in that particular library, they all had Master of Science degrees or some sort of Master of Education, some sort of graduate level educational related degree. And I was told that the vast majority, they share with me that, of course, they can't speak for every library throughout the United States of America, but they did share with me that, I'm not sure how this subject even came up, but they did share with me that to become a librarian, you will more than likely have to be very well educated with a very high grade point average. And that was something that I said once I thought about it. So yes, that makes perfect sense. So I definitely like that idea of a student asking that librarian, because this librarian, he or she is someone who is extremely highly well educated, and their education focuses predominantly on the education related matters, the matters of what's taking place sociologically. And we've reached a point in which we will now bring our episode to an end. So this will conclude this episode of the Dr. and Mrs. Curry podcast. Mrs. Curry and I genuinely hope that you found the information informative and that either you or someone you know could benefit from this platform. If so, think about liking and sharing this video. If you have not already done so, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, which is Dr. Joshua John Curry, ED.D, and hit the notification bell so you can be notified when videos and presentations have been uploaded. In addition to our parenting related podcasts, we have multi-systemic presentations that our organization put together and upload to YouTube. This also includes a relapse prevention progressing towards sustained active recovery away from active addiction podcast that we just got off the ground as well. Whenever you have time, visit our website, which is www.drcurryandassociates.com, which will connect you to our company, which is Dr. Curry and Associates. Look at viewing and following us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at Dr. Joshua Curry. Thank you for taking part in this episode, and Mrs. Curry and I will catch you the next time around.